Subi East redevelopment. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which we are broadcasting here tonight in Perth, the Whadjuk people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. My name is Viv Warren and I'm going to be hosting tonight's session. We're here tonight to provide you with an update on the Subi East project and let you know how the design for the development is shaping up. Tonight we've got quite a few people that we're going to be hearing from. We will start by hearing from Dean Mudford, who's the Chief Operating Officer from DevelopmentWA. He'll give you an overview of who DevelopmentWA is and our role in the project. He'll also provide a bit of background as to how the project came to be. We'll then hand over to Patrick Smith, the Senior Development Manager who's leading this project, and he'll give you a bit of a project overview. We'll then hand over to Catherine Bentley and Andrew Watts. So Catherine Bentley is the Community Relations Manager from DevelopmentWA and Andrew Watts from Creating Communities. They'll give you an overview of the community engagement to date and what we've heard so far. Then we'll hand over to Shay Hatch, the Landscape Architect from UDLA, and Shannon O'Shea from Haynes Charlie to talk you through the design directions. And then finally, we're going to open up for a panel discussion where we'll answer some of your questions. So you can ask questions at any time throughout the session this evening. We'll be collecting them in the back end and we'll address them towards the end following all the presentations during that panel discussion. Now we've had over 60 people register for this evening's session, so we'll expect quite a few questions to come through, or at least we hope so. And we envisage we probably won't get time to get through all of those questions. So any questions that remain unanswered by the end of the webinar, we will respond to them and we'll get them back out to everybody who has registered for this webinar. And we'll let you know where you can access them via email. We'll also be recording tonight's webinar, so if you have to dash off or you know somebody who hasn't had a chance to book in tonight, this will be available following the session. And then if you have additional questions, you'll be able to ask those as well following this evening's webinar. Okay, without further ado, I would like to welcome Dean Mudford, the Chief Operating Officer from DevelopmentWA. Over to you, Dean.
Thanks, Viv, and hello to everyone in the community. Thanks very much for joining us here this evening. We very much appreciate it. I thought I'd start by giving you a brief overview of DevelopmentWA. DevelopmentWA is the state government's central land and property development agency, and we've got a portfolio of projects right across the state. Some of the more familiar ones that you may have seen out and about is Perry Lakes in Floreat, the Montario Quarter in Shenton Park, Yagan Square and Elizabeth Quay in the city, and we have land holdings in Alkimos and in Claremont as well. And DevelopmentWA was formed through the integration of the former Landcorp and the Metropolitan Redevelopment Authority a couple of years ago. And our business involves a significant portfolio of projects across the Perth metropolitan area, but we also have a significant development portfolio in industrial land, and we have also projects right across regional Western Australia as well. And the role of DevelopmentWA is to act as a bridge between government, the community and the private sector to provide mutually beneficial outcomes and to activate job creation through our activities in the land development area. So having said that, DevelopmentWA was asked by the state government to undertake the redevelopment of the Subi East project, and we have a plan there for you to see the scale and highlight the extent of the planning precinct itself. You can see the Subiaco precinct on the left-hand side, Subiaco Oval precinct on the left-hand side, the new college, the Bob Hawke College, Mueller Park in the centre, all of the private land holdings that abut the railway reserve, and then Princess Margaret Hospital in the top right-hand corner of the screen. So the key components that we are tasked with responsibility for is to demolish the stadium around Subiaco Oval. Clearly that part has been completed, as well as buildings at Princess Margaret Hospital, to undertake the planning process to facilitate the development of these key pieces of land, and then to undertake all the works associated with that. The target densities for this two sites set a minimum of 2,000 dwellings, which will be delivered over probably a significant period of time into the future. And we're also required to reinstate Subiaco Oval, which to a large extent has now been completed, with the exception of the landscaping works adjacent. So our current focus is obtaining community feedback to inform the final master plan, and we have our team here to talk to you tonight. Following that, we will then be continuing to gain approval for the plan, undertake all the civil works and the roads and services in order to develop the area, complete all the marketing and all the landscaping and the public areas, and then we'll be releasing lots to the market over a series of years into the future to unlock private built form development. So again, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and I'll hand back to Viv and our other presenters. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. We're now going to hear from Patrick Smith, the Senior Development Manager from DevelopmentWA, who's going to provide you with a bit of an overview of the project. So over to you, Patrick.
Thanks, Viv, and thanks for joining us tonight. So in terms of the master planning, I guess the question is, where are we up to with the master plan? Well, let's start with the vision plan or vision concept that you would have seen before. And that forms the basis of the business case that was approved by government. And essentially it has a vision statement, which is a connected city village that honours place and living memories and creates whole of life living for all generations. So that's certainly the vision we're striving to achieve with this master plan. And it has a number of objectives that we are also seeking to achieve. So to build a sense of place, to promote economic well-being, to promote urban efficiency, to enhance connectivity, promote social inclusion, and to enhance environmental integrity. So when we start any project, we look at the opportunities and the givens or the agreed positions for such a project. Now, as with the vision and the objectives, this master plan process offers a number of opportunities to us. Firstly, the master plan can actually improve on the vision concept. And that's really just because we have additional information and further feedback from the community on that. We also have the opportunity to look closer at public spaces, how they interface with buildings, and how their heritage is represented on site. And we have already made provision for the multi-use recreational facility and also facilities for the WA Football Commission sites on those. So a number of agreed positions or the givens that we are working with is we do need to provide a variety of open space for all the future residents. So all the way from children through to the elderly. And we have density targets for this development, which have already been mentioned. Now, we do know that the Oval will be retained at Miller Park, and we also need to make sure that the school integrates with this development for us as well. So, in terms of the master plan, what is the master plan? So, the purpose of a master plan is to create a graphical plan, and that's supported by a number of different bits of information that gives some high-level direction for the area. It also sets out the vision for the future of the area and provides guidance on the layout, the design and building form of the area. And lastly, the preparation of this master plan includes high-level expert input, wide public consultation, and ultimately approval by the Minister for Planning. In terms of the expert input, we have quite a diverse consultant team, and I won't bore you with all of those, but the key takeouts here is we have Aim Charlie as the lead design consultant, and they'll be talking later in this presentation, and UDLA, who's our landscape architect. They'll both be presenting later tonight. We then have a number of other consultants looking at things like heritage, engineering, traffic, sustainability and innovation, and property economics. And we have a very strong representation from the Aboriginal elders in this group, and that's led by the Aboriginal Development Manager, Barbara, who will also be talking a bit later tonight. So there's been a lot of talking, and I'll just basically group this talking into the groups we have. So Obviously, we've been talking to all our consultants, the entire consultant team. We've also been talking to key stakeholders, both informally and formally, and at a strategic and a technical level. We've also had several peer reviews of the design to date, and we've had an independent design review done as well to make sure we deliver the best possible design outcome for this project. Through the community reference group and the elders support group, we've also received a lot of feedback from them on this, and we've actually learned quite a lot to date. So we've actually had to take that into consideration, and we're looking at the concept plan, the vision concept plan that was the basis of the business case. And there are quite a few things there that we really have to have a closer look at. So firstly is the buffer around the oval. So we've heard both from the heritage side and from the community side that you want more space around the oval. You don't want the oval to be hemmed in by buildings, and we've certainly taken that on board. We've also heard that you want more access to the oval. There's a strong view to improve this access, both to the oval and around the oval. And a few other things have changed. So the school building's shape has changed. We also need to improve the interface with Roberts Road. And then on the north of the plan, you'll see a long red horizontal line. That's a very high voltage power cable that actually sits in Subiaco Road. And moving that's really, really expensive. So what we're trying to do is design around that, so we try and minimize the expenditure on this site. On the right-hand side, on the PMH side, there are two things just worth pointing out. The site has quite a lot of level changes in it, and our link to York Street needs to be reconsidered to make sure we can actually get cars up and down that road and steps and so forth. And originally we were going to move the old outpatients building next to Godfrey House, but the advice from a heritage point of view is to rather keep that in place. And so we've decided to keep that on the corner there. And then lastly, we've had a lot of comments from the community about open space and actually keeping and providing more open space. So just briefly on this, we've had a look at the plan that the city and the community have both strongly supported, and that's the Kitchener Common Master Plan. This was approved in about 2017. And the key standout of this plan is that it has the 4 rectangular sports fields in addition to the oval to become its public space. Now, we had a look at this plan early on, and to be quite honest, it would have been much easier just to use this plan. It would have saved us a lot of time and money. But this plan does present us some challenges, and these have only become known since we've done some further work. So this information wasn't available at the time this plan was considered. So firstly, the school, Bobble College, is actually much larger than originally anticipated. And on the plan, you can see the black dotted line that shows stage 1 and stage 2 of the school. The important thing here is that the 20-metre green link north of the school is going to be retained together with the Adepo Pines. That becomes a really important connection throughout the site. The Heritage Council has indicated they require a bund around the oval. Now, this wasn't known until quite recently when we had some further discussion around that. But what it does do, it creates an uneven surface. And if you have a look at the plan where those red dots are, that actually creates a bund or a level difference between the site to the top and bottom of that, which is an uneven site and not suitable for courts. We've also had a look at those courts themselves. They're actually a little small, so they're not quite suitable for soccer and hockey and those, but they could possibly be used for other sports. And the plan envisaged capping of the railway to the left, the blue area to the left. We've had a look at the feasibility of that, and it's just incredibly expensive to cap a railway line, so it's not feasible to do that, unfortunately. And then lastly, it relies on a lot of the buildings being pushed very close to the railway line. And unfortunately, the feedback we've had on that is that it's not possible to be able to do that. Now, just looking at the plan, the site is constrained. It has a big oval in the middle. It has a school and a co-shared recreation facility to the right. So really, it only leaves the north and the western side of the site available for development. And as you'll see later in the presentations, we've actually adopted these key principles from the Kitchener Common Plan, which is being transferred over to our further development and further thinking. Viv, thank you very much. That's it from me. Now, thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Now I'm going to hand over to Catherine Bentley, the Manager for Community Relations at DevelopmentWA, and Andrew Watt, Director from Creating Communities, to talk you through the community engagement today and what we've heard so far. So over to you, Catherine and Andrew.
Thanks very much, Viv. I wanted to start by saying we started the engagement on this process back in 2018, a very early part of the project, and it was really founded in stakeholder engagement with the Whadjuk Working Party as a key part of that. We worked with state and local government partners, talking with the education department around Bob Hawke College and what that may look like, industry partners, and also local businesses. So as we went through this project, we really made sure that we're working with all those partners right from the start. The first key community piece of input came in June 2018. So we started that with a survey that went out to 23,000 homes, and we had more than 1,500 responses that came back from that. And that really set the scene for us in terms of what the community's expectations would need to be for a project like Subi East. So the design team brought all of those key inputs together, both from stakeholders and from community, and came back with some vision pillars. So a vision that Patrick mentioned earlier that you saw in 2019 as part of the vision concept. So what were the pillars that we'd need to base this project on? And I guess it came back to 4 key areas. Kaya Subi, which is Whadjuk for welcome. We had a connected city village, a green pulse, and a collective well-being. So these 4 key areas really helped define what the project would need to address as it moved forward. And then we had the design team prepare us with an initial concept plan, which was released in February 2019, the one in which you've all seen and is out currently in the public. That really formed the basis for the business case for the project. You would have seen us out at the Subi markets. You'd have seen us at Eula Park. We were at a number of different events around Subi. We went to the Western Suburbs Business Association. We visited a number of events during that time to get your feedback on what that initial concept looked like. We received more than 500 comments throughout that process, and we got some really great feedback from you, the community, which really resonated and built on the consultation that was done in 2018. So the themes that came back as part of the vision concept really resonated with the initial research done in 2018. So that really talked about regeneration, making sure the design quality that we'd be doing was high, that we made sure that there was some green links that connected the site, that we considered parking and traffic. We included height and density in the right locations, and that we considered the amount of open space that would be available for the community. I'd like to hand over now to Andrew, who will talk us through the consultation process as part of the master planning.
Thanks very much, Catherine, and good evening, everyone. Yes, we've had the pleasure of being involved in the project since late last year when the project moved into the master planning phase. And a key part of that master planning phase is the cultural context and place narrative, which really provides that background, respects the history and heritage that this unique place has. I'm not going to take you through all of the elements of the engagement that we've undertaken. You can see some of them there. Hopefully a number of you actually provided input via the SenseMaker tool, which enabled you to share your aspirations and also your memories in relation to the precinct might have been at Subiaco Oval, PMH or other areas. We've had focus groups. There's been a project office for people to be able to drop in, which closed due COVID-19, but thankfully can open again tomorrow. I'm going to touch a bit more on the project reference group in the next slide, but they've been very important and I'd like to recognise the group who've been involved in that, 35 people from different groups, local residents, etc. One of the things that we've hoped you've had a chance to log on to is the Subi Stories or Stories of Subi. And pretty much on there, there's a range of podcasts, vox pops, images, all history of the different areas within the precinct. And those podcasts have some very famous people, some people who have long memories, including people who've lived in Subi for many a year, and vox pops from people from across the community and stakeholders. So I'd encourage you to get onto the site and have a look at that. The 2 workshops that are listed at the bottom there were focused with a community reference group on informing the cultural context and place narrative. And later on in the session, Barbara Binder is going to talk to you about the work that's been done with the Aboriginal elders in informing the cultural context and place narrative as well. As we move to the next slide, we'll see that there is a process that we put in place for the community reference group that has 5 workshops. 2 of those, the workshops are those big blue bubbles. 2 of those are focused on informing the cultural context and place narrative, and 3 of them were formed around informing the master plan, we're currently up and finished the 4th workshop. So we've got one workshop to go where the actual final design comes together. In between those workshops, we have the design team being fed all the information that we're getting from the community reference group, plus information that we're getting back from the community that Catherine and her team are putting out via the DevelopmentWA website for people to have their say in between each meeting. And Barbara will talk to you a bit about the elders meetings in her session. As we go to the next slide, I just wanted to touch on what is that actual cultural context and place narrative for those who might not be too sure about it. It's actually quite a detailed document that captures and represents the cultural history and context of the place. It's very important that this isn't a greenfields development. This is a place that's had its own history, unique identity, and we need to capture that in the stories that we're telling about informing the planning for the future. It's also important that we had the right people doing this. So we've had anthropologists, we've had historians. Some of you may know a gentleman by the name of Ken Spielman, who's written the history documents for the city of Subiaco, plus Subiaco Football Club involved. And it really is going to help inform the future planning and guide the heritage interpretation and public art into the future. In my last slide, I'm just going to show you the link between what Catherine was talking about and also Patrick, and what's come through in the place narrative. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the Subiaco redevelopment scheme objectives that Patrick sort of touched on. And so they're very important about the key sort of things that we want to develop through a vibrant, sustainable design. The project pillars came through from phase 1 of the engagement that Catherine talked about. And to the right, we actually have some place narratives. Now, they have quite a bit of detail to them, but each of these place narratives, and I won't read them all out, I came back via the CRG and also the feedback that we got from the community about the stories that should be reflected in not only the open space design and community facilities, but also in the built form and other areas in the art, and also in the way that the culture and history is reflected in the development in the future. So there's some really great messages that we've got from that we can then pass on to the design team. And we thank everyone very much for the input that they've provided, because it's extremely valuable. And as I said, really informs the designs going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew and Catherine. Now, if you have just joined us this evening, or you have in the last 20 minutes and didn't hear me at the beginning, you can ask questions at any time throughout the session. You just need to go to your bottom of your screen where all the controls are, click on questions, type in your question and press submit. We're receiving questions throughout the whole session and we'll address them towards the end following all the presentations when we open up for a panel discussion. So I encourage you all to please submit your questions as you go through, and we'll be collating them and addressing as many as we can at the end of the session. Okay, it's time to hand over to Barbara Binder from Carter Designs to talk to us about Aboriginal engagement. So over to you, Barbara.
Thanks, Vivian. Welcome, everybody. I'll just get this little video going. I think that's the way it works. Okay, so can we go into the next slide, please? Welcome. And the Aboriginal Elders Group was put together or formed to help DevelopmentWA with part of this community engagement process. I work very closely with Farley Garlett, who's a senior Whadjuk elder, and Farley and I have probably just decided to work very closely with elders first in the first phase of this project, because there's obviously a couple of phases to go through. And so to get the project started, we met with elders. There are 9 members of our group, and we take guidance from them. So we've met 3 times to discuss the project to date. And the key feedback includes a sense of place, movement of people, and creating a village, Noongar culture and placemaking. They've come up with a theme as well, and some songlines. And I'll just sort of go through some of these really quickly. You know, a sense of place was about embedding Noongar culture in the entire area. That includes the PMH site as well as the Subiaco site that's going to be developed. So the elders look at it from a whole approach and not in separate, separate areas. So they're connecting everything together as they develop this idea or this sense of place. and they want it to reflect a movement of people so that it's free flowing, because the area traditionally was more about people moving through that area, going from Kings Park, you know, and connecting to Lake Mungas Lake and all those kind of areas as they travelled. So they want to keep the movement free flowing in the way that the area becomes developed. And creating a village was taken from their experiences in living in confined spaces, particularly around camps and reserves, because a lot of the elders that we've got on our group grew up on camps and reserves. And so they started thinking around that idea of village, and the idea, because, you know, that concept applies to non-Indigenous people and it's a concept that people understand. And so they're saying, well, you know, in the camps and reserves, they had rules and they had specific spaces for specific events, they had public spaces, they had private spaces, they had reflection spaces, and everybody kind of knew what spaces were for what activity. So they want to create that idea of a village within the Subiaco East development project, and in doing that, and the way to do that, they feel, is through the environment. So through all of the what everyone else calls green links, they call biddy trails. And so they want to put those or connect those trails to a theme of the 6 seasons, because Noongar culture is reliant on the 6 seasons in terms of lifestyle, and the knowledge from the 6 seasons is maintained today. So it's bringing our past into our present, and building those relationships around the 6 seasons. And they're thinking of doing that through, you know, the idea of using 6 markers, and each one will represent a season. And those markers, they'd like to see some garden that grows in that season, and then connect all of that through those biddy trails, so that you also get, you know, education. And it means that you end up with a nice little tourist trail as well that people can follow and learn about Noongar culture. And that's something that they're really, really strong on, is the education of Noongar culture, and to put those themes in place as much as possible. One of the other themes that they came up with was songlines. We have a couple of songlines that go through that area, and songlines, when they go through an area, then you're only like talking about part of that songline and not the whole songline. You're just talking about the part that goes through that area. So they'll probably explore that a little bit more as well. So these ideas have all been passed on to the CRG and to DevelopmentWA design team. And then the future interpretation opportunities were to think about language in specific areas. So if you're having a cafe area, you know, give it a Noongar name that represents eating and gathering. And then if you have a reflection space, they're saying, you know, let's give it a Noongar name that is relational with that reflection space. And so they're thinking about identifying specific areas using language, because once we use language, we again are educating people about Noongar culture, because our language is relevant to our environment. And so what they're saying is, you know, this is just going to expand that educational process. And the green links and connecting the areas as well, again, you know, they're really keen to share culture through that space, not just in the gardens, but in the walk trails. And maybe you put in, you know, public artworks along the way that represent cultural elements to connect the green links, because Aboriginal tracks and trails were never one big road like what we have now, where Earl Road connects in contemporary lifestyle. They were tracks and they were trails, and they had, you know, specific, they went from camp to camp, so to speak. And so, you know, they're thinking about those kind of processes. And I think the future interpretation opportunities, you know, come in phase 2, but definitely worth looking at. And the elders are exploring all of those ideas. Yeah. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Okay, it's now time to hear from Shay Hatch, the landscape architect from UDLA, and Shannon O'Shea from Hames Charlie, who are going to talk to you about the direction of the design for Subi East development. So over to you, Shay and Shannon.
Thank you, Viv. So yeah, Shannon and I are going to run through these slides with you tonight. You would have all seen this slide, or the slides that make up this previous these are the key moves, and they've really been guiding us through our investigation of the master plan opportunities and constraints over the last few weeks and months. So tonight we're going to get into a little bit more detail, starting off with looking at how we're approaching the master plan. So it's been really important for us, it's been really important for us to consider the context in which the site is based. It's quite a traditional grid, and that reflects those sort of formal, restrained English landscapes that we see around Subiaco. Mueller Park is a really perfect example of this. But what's been really important to us throughout the entire process, and something that we've heard from the community, is this opportunity for a green link or a biddy trail, as Barbara just talked about, to link the site together and be something that is a little bit wild and starts to do a lot of things with it around sustainability and interpretation and public use. So we've really been looking at how that green link can connect the two sites and then further out into the surrounding context. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about some of the green spaces and the built form and how the master plan is coming together. All of these spaces have been guided by memories, technology, movement networks, a whole bunch of things that we've heard from you, that we've heard from all the stakeholders and all the background research that we've done. So you'll start to see these threads pulling through the approaches we're talking about tonight. Shannon, did you want to touch on the master plan built form approach for us?
Yeah, so as part of the, with working with the community reference group, we had the opportunity to provide, look at that spatial framework from the elements of where does density go, the appropriate location of green spaces, community space and the urban plazas, but also when we're thinking about the connection between neighbourhoods and also to the surrounding neighbourhoods. So what you're seeing is the model that we provided to those members. And while we have been working in parallel, so testing the technical constraints and opportunities, it was really good to see those preferences for the spatial alignments coming together. So this is where we started to see that breathing space around the oval and where at those key nodal areas to apply the density. So where it sort of stepped back away from the oval edge, but also then looking at the peer match site where there is more opportunity to internalise that building height and also creates breathing space in the middle there for that public amenity. So this is where it's been a really good exercise in parallel working with those teams. Thanks, Sharon.
So we have been looking at the site as a whole, as a master plan space, but it is pretty clear that there's going to be a few neighbourhoods. Specifically, there's going to be that rail neighbourhood, but probably the ones that we're going to focus on tonight are the Oval neighbourhood and PMH. So we'll start on PMH as a site. So what we've got here is our key moves plan. And this sort of talks to some of the main approaches that we've taken from a landscape point of view and also from built form. So I'll start with the landscape. We've got the outpatients building to the southeast of the site. And as Patrick touched on before, we're looking to leave it in its current location. It's been there a very long time, and our advice is that that's the preferred location for it from a heritage perspective. So what we're really thinking about is how we can provide some context to that, given that it will be amongst some pretty tall buildings and a bit of a different context to what it is now. The hospital does have high buildings in it. So we're looking at that northern corridor to connect it through to some of the heritage buildings in the school, and a green link along Thomas Road that helps connect it to Godfrey House. So on that green link, we're looking at how we can really make sure that Mueller Park and that sort of diagonal access that comes through Mueller Park connects into the site. We have that real big central public park. And then we're looking at a green buffer along Thomas Road to just provide a little bit of breathing space to the development and get us off that really busy road. Working closely with the road networks to ensure that we've got access and as required to service the lots. Looking at the underpass, making that as safe as possible and a preferred access point onto the site. And Shannon, did you want to touch quickly on the built form?
Yeah, and also how, the built form responding to, let alone internally, those heritage places of value. So where we've got Godfrey House, but we've also got the outpatient building. So it's looking at the relationships with new built form alongside those. And then where are those sort of key landmark height opportunities and gateway entrance features that can sort of relate to that. But it's also on the edges. It's talking about how the built form needs to respond to the surrounding context.
So the central POS contains at the moment the stack, which you might all be aware of. So that's that really big building that has the big chimney in the middle, and that was used to generate power for the hospital. And there is the opportunity for us to retain that. When we look at the levels on site, what we'll have to do is consider exposing the underground parts of it, which have some really cool infrastructure in there, which would make for a bit of an interesting site. What this approach really needs is a use for that building and an idea behind it. So what we're talking about at the moment is how can we activate that space and make it functional for the community. The second option is that we would remove the stack. That really gives us a lot more POS to work with. So there's obviously pros and cons to both those moves, but we've got here an example from a park in Melbourne where it's the same scale as the site we're looking at. And within there you can fit in multi-use courts, seating nodes, table tennis, outdoor gym, and a pavilion for community events. So you start to see that this space is quite big. And the stack offers some opportunities, but it also offers a bit of a spatial constraint. So we're working through that as a team at the moment, and we've had lots of input from the CRG on this as well. On that central park, just looking at what the potential uses for that could be, we've talked a lot about the interpretation opportunities for it to be a space about children to celebrate the history of PMH, potentially through referencing some of the hospital uses. There was this great space called the Mega Zone within the hospital, which had some really brilliant colours and was a really happy space. But it's also going to be a community space. It's the centre of the PMH development, so we see that a lot of residents will be utilising the space daily. There's opportunity to put in the markers that Barb talked about as well, and connect that site through to Muir Park and then on to the Subi Oval area. And then the other green space within PMH is the Thomas Street green space. So that's looking at a edge along Thomas Street, as I said, to give the development some breathing space. We are looking at really opening up that underpass and making it a safe and comfortable environment, and investigating opportunities for interpretation, specifically around the outpatients building, where we could potentially have another marker. But it also gives us the space to provide a little bit of a quiet area, which might be a place of reflection. There's also some important landscaping and garden memorials through there that we'd like to retain and explore into the future. So certainly talking to a lot of the PMH alumni about this space and how we could interpret some of those memories.
And yeah, then just looking at Thomas Street from the built form response as well. So looking at the different layers and thresholds between, if we're looking at the development having a commercial edge versus a residential edge, what sort of safety mechanisms are we sort of needing in place, but also consideration for access for parking as well as drop off, and in terms of the level of activity. And therefore, what sort of guidance do we need to provide to new development?
Okay, so that's PMH. We're going to move on to Subi Oval neighbourhood. So some of the key moves here, as Patrick touched on before, getting Subiaco Road on the right alignment, that helps us to retain as many trees as possible and to avoid having to relocate that HV cable, which costs a lot of money. We can think of better things to spend that on. The green link is something that's really important to this site. So how do we genuinely pull that through not only development sites, but through those public spaces where we've got a little bit more room to explore that green link and all the different things that it can do for us. The oval surrounds, we want to give that a little bit more, the oval a little bit more breathing space and ensure that there's public use to the oval surrounds. even where it's between the buildings. The heritage gates are obviously a really important part of Subi Oval, and it's really important that they don't just feel like they've been left out in the middle of nowhere and have no context. So really looking at how we ensure that they have a relationship to the oval in the final design. Shannon, did you want to touch on the built form here?
Yeah, and I think importantly as well is when we're looking at the central space with the oval, it's how again the buildings and the environmental response, so that we're ensuring that we're not completely overshadowing this space and that there is good sun penetration and outlook. So therefore again, where is the height appropriately located, that it's not going to impact that public realm in a detrimental way.
So we're just going to do a little bit of a quick investigation into some of these spaces, starting with the gates. We see this as a brilliant opportunity to celebrate what is the historic home of WA football. We've obviously had the Sandover Medalist Walk, which was around the oval, sort of at that southern entrance to the oval previously, that we want to reinterpret and think about how we can make that something that people want to come and visit. We're looking at ensuring that this space remains a gateway that maintains that connection to the oval. It is quite a big site, and it does provide us a lot of flexibility with use. So you can see on the left-hand side there all the opportunities for use within that space. The Oval Park. So as I mentioned before, it's important that we look at how the oval surrounds can be used by the public. It is going to be somewhat of a ring park. It is quite a substantial space, and we're looking at both how we can reflect that heritage fund that the Heritage Council has identified as being important, and ensure that it's really functional for the community. So we've heard that we want lots of trees and shade in this space so that when you're watching the games, junior football, there's lots of places to shelter. And we want to try and put some functional spaces into that as well. We've obviously got some level differences through there that we have to work through. And we really want to celebrate the experience of, going to the football as a spectator and how that used to feel, and sort of reinterpret that in different ways.
And then if we're looking at the oval from, the appropriate sort of setback of the built form and how that relationship sits with the oval viewing experience. So looking back at the historic photo, it just gives that indication of the ground plane that's going to be really important for that experience. So therefore, how do we provide good guidance around that for built form edging onto the oval? So just looking at those images down on the lower section, where it's the difference between if it's a commercial edge versus more that residential, where we've got the layered setback of in the residential, the landscape provides a layered separation. Whereas if it's a highly active space, that we want more permeability through from that oval connection. And then looking at Roberts Road, so just in that top middle image with the section through showing the dotted outline of the old stadium stand in the background. So we're again making sure that the built form is appropriately scaled to that Roberts Road neighbouring response, so that again we're considering the environmental response of new buildings coming online here.
So obviously with the previous approaches that have been put forward, so both the Kitchener and the business case, there was discussion around the opportunity to relocate figs. Figs are pretty hardy species in regards to relocating them. It's something we've done around Perth, and in other states it's quite common. But we really want to interrogate that opportunity and make a decision based on what's best for the figs and the public and the project. So here we've listed some pros and cons to retaining the figs on site. It really provides a bit of context to that corner and to the built form. As I said, they are pretty hardy, so building up next to them is done, it happens. Potentially this becomes a little bit of a privatised asset. So that's something that we're considering, that, these are such a beautiful community important for the community realm, and we'd like to see how we could potentially explore them more in a public use. So the other option is that they could potentially be relocated, all of them or some of them. And on the next slide, we just show some of the opportunities around relocating the figs to more of a central park or public space where potentially they can be used for shelter and become a little bit more part of the public realm. So we have spoken to the CRG about this. We are getting a lot of feedback on it, and it's really factoring into our decision making around finalising some of those lots into the future. So with the park, we're looking at that northern oval park and the opportunities for how that can be used. It is a significant space. It's giving us a great opportunity to explore sustainable practices such as wooded pond beds, which is water sensitive urban design, getting a whole heap of trees into that space and shelter. The Oval was always a community space for gathering. So we see this space as being an opportunity to celebrate the community and that gathering opportunity. We also have some pretty large areas through here, so investigating how they can be used for active use when the Oval's in use by other groups. So that's what's directing our current investigations into this space and ensuring we've got those connections both north, south and east-west. And then our last park around the area is that 20-metre buffer that Patrick mentioned to the north of Bob Hawke College. Obviously, it's a great space to have that green link connect through. You've got the Aleppo pines there. And we are looking at how we can really, again, reinforce that underpass to the north through to West Leederville. That sort of northern track through to the lakes is really important based on some of the comments that Barb had mentioned earlier as well. So it will be both interpretive and it will be a huge pedestrian link. So that connection to the train station is really important. So this site will have that real strong north-south, east-west connection. And then where we've got that blue spot on too, we've got quite a large area to look at something of an intergenerational community space that has a strong relationship with the school. So I think that's all from Shannon and I for tonight. We're looking forward to answering some of your questions in a minute. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for your presentation. We're now going to invite all of our guest speakers tonight to hop on board again. And we're going to open up to a couple of questions that have come through. So we have received quite a lot of questions. We are not going to be able to get through all of them, but we've selected a few of them just to make sure we've got a good range of questions that we're asking our panel members tonight. If you have submitted a question and it isn't answered, please know that we will respond to this question following the webinar, and we will be letting everybody know that's registered that those responses are ready for you to view. So I will start with a question from Hugh. So this is a question to Catherine and Andrew. So Hugh has said, Catherine Bettany spoke of collective wellbeing that seems to be overlooked in the master plan in favour to ignore demands of that active open space for community and waffle. So could I please hand over to Catherine to respond to Hugh's statement / question?
Thanks, Vivian. Thank you, Hugh, for the question. I think we recognise that the space is very important to the community, and we have had a lot of feedback about the open space, both passive and active, actually. And I understand that the open space is a key issue for the community, but well-being is more than just active open space. It's so much more. It's about creating that safe place, a shared space, one that's inclusive for everyone, one that's recognising the history of the place. So I think when we talk about well-being, it's about a lot of different things. As you know, the master plan design is still in process, but I know that the design team are taking into consideration all of these things and the feedback that we've had for the last 18 months on this project and more. So we want to create spaces in the development that are for enjoyment, and I know as part of our engagement process so far, some of the wellbeing elements that people have asked for include things like places to linger, places to reflect, active places, places for music events, places to view football and matches at the Oval. And I know all of these elements are being actively considered by the design team. Thanks. Viv.
I'm happy to add one little bit to that, and just to concur with what Catherine said about a range of feedback about that. But we've also had a range of feedback about the use of Subiaco Oval, which previously wasn't accessible as a sporting or recreational space for the community in the last decades, because obviously it was used for AFL football predominantly, but also for large-scale events. So part of the work that we're looking at is the actual activation and use of that oval as part of the planning going forward.
Great. Thanks, Catherine and Andrew. This question is from Sharon, and it's a question to Shay and Shannon. The green links are great. How wide is the green buffer along Thomas Road?
So we're still working through the details of this one, but we acknowledge that it really needs to be significant enough that you're really off Thomas and we can fit some good buffer of trees and green space in there. So, you know, I don't think anything too much less or less than 10 metres, and I mean, we'd love to get 15 to 20 in there, but it really depends on how we go through that detail. So that's kind of the detail that we're working through at the moment, and ensuring that, you know, it's activated, that those buildings that are along that edge have a frontage to Thomas Street as well, because we don't want to turn our backs on it. So it's a bit of a balancing act between making it a really comfortable space to walk along and be in for those residents that live there, as well as making sure that Thomas Street still remains activated and comfortable.
Shay, while I've got you, I will ask another question that's come through. How many figs are remaining to either move or retain? So how many figs are we talking about?
So there, unfortunately, there's only 3 left on site after we had our last storm. I breathed a sigh of relief this morning. So yeah, we've got 3 trees there at the moment. They're the ones that were in the car park, just off the Hayden Button Bridge there.
I'm going to ask this question because it's continuing on fig, and I'll just round it out. If you can do a quick response, that would be great. Although figs are hardy, given the size, isn't there a significant risk that they will significantly be at risk from the shock of transplanting them?
Yep, so any transplanting of any trees does have risk. We understand that. We do work really closely with arborists whenever we consider something like this. I guess there's a balancing between, if it's in a private lot, we lose somewhat of the control around how they're protected when that construction goes ahead, although we do try to make sure through all requirements that it is, as opposed to if we were to relocate them, we would work with someone for a year or 2 beforehand to make sure that they were as ready to go as possible and that they had all the care post-move. But yeah, there is a risk. So as I said, we're really weighing up all of the options around how we keep those trees there for the community use and for the biodiversity of the site into the future, because we see them as a great asset to the site. We're landscape architects, so we love trees as well.
Great, thank you, Shay. Shannon, this is a question for you. Is there a plan, and this is a question from Nicholas, is there a plan to manage the tall buildings overviewing the school and privacy concerns relating to this?
Yeah, there's certainly, and this is a part of the real detailed testing that we're starting to get into ourselves. So it's really ensuring that where we are locating height, that there is good setback, but also to follow this process will be the development of design guidelines, so that they, again, specific to each lot, there will be key criteria that it needs to meet. And through that process, there's a design review panel that will, any developer that will put forward a proposal has to demonstrate an appropriate response and to a high level of quality on that as well. So there are a number of passes overlooking can be well looked after.
Okay, we have a technical. Okay, everyone has frozen for a moment, so we'll just give everyone a second to come back, make sure we haven't lost anyone. Hopefully everyone as viewers is still logged on and all is okay. I suspect this might have something to do with our strange weather. We're back online. Shannon, I do apologise. I think you froze halfway through responding to that question. So if you don't mind just reviewing a little bit more and repeating.
As I was saying there, so we're in the process of doing detailed testing to ensure an appropriate envelope response, but also it is to ensure that as part of this process is the development of design guidelines. So specific to each lot, there will be key criteria that any development will need to respond to. And as part of that process, there's also a design review panel that it needs to be able to demonstrate that response. So there's a number of passes that are in place to ensure that there's an appropriate response there.
Shannon, I've got just a clarification question, so I'll just ask that, and then one more question while I got you. Can you please advise how far north of the Oval the underpass is? So that's a clarification question, then I'll ask you one.
North of the Oval, the underpass is, so it's the existing underpass from West Leederville we're talking about. From the Oval, I think it's less than 200 metres, so it's not a significant distance away. So yeah, that is sort of something we are looking at, and it's ensuring that there's good legible approach and connection through to the underpass there.
Great, thanks Shannon. And the other question that was for you from David is, will the links into West Leederville be strengthened?
Yeah, I think certainly this is where Shay can actually respond to that as well. So certainly the intent is to improve those links. So from the Subiaco East precinct side, there's certainly about how can we make that a much more safer experience, but also a much more legible experience there as well. So recognising that once the Bob Hawke School is fully I think it's due for completion in 2023. There's going to be a number of student movements. So the additional pedestrian and cycle movement really needs to be thought about. So that's another key part of our technical interrogation of the plan at this point in time as well.
I think also in consideration is that whilst we're designing something now and with the current climate that we have and brief that we have, we know that this is going to be a long-term project. And that in the future there will be most likely new connections that make sense and that there's budget for or more demand for. So as part of our project, we're really highlighting where those key connections are most likely to be and ensuring that the design allows for those into the future. And also working really closely with all of the stakeholders that we mentioned earlier, so that in those surrounding areas, any policy that's being put together, we're making sure that it aligns with the key strategic moves of our plans as well, so that we're all sort of pulling in the same direction over the next few years with this site and its surrounds.
Great, thank you. I know we are receiving more questions that are design related, so I'll probably come back to you in a little while. The next question is for you, Barbara. It's a question from Sharon. The idea of Indigenous movement is excellent. Are the trails to be considered to Kings Park and Munga Lake?
Yeah, the elders are talking, or they're in discussion around that, and how we connect those, how we connect that movement in a broader context. So part of that process is looking at those two song lines that go through the area. And the other part is by opening those, the idea of the Six Seasons markers, so that the movement becomes more free-flowing. And the other issue, the other thought was that, we passed on to the design team that we don't actually congest the areas of entrance into into Subiaco, into the development sites. So it obviously needs a lot more discussion and fleshing out of those ideas, but the conversation's being had. So yes, they're definitely talking about connecting the broader pathways of Lake Munga and Kings Park in particular.
Great, thank you, Barbara. Okay, we've got a few more questions back to Shay and Shannon. I'll just leave it open to whoever wants to respond to this. This person says they've noticed a green arrow over the railway line towards Lake Munga as part of the green link. Is that still part of the proposal?
Yeah, so part of so the whole brief for us was to create this green link because it was acknowledged that this site is a really important central point to a whole bunch of really significant green spaces. And this also talks to the stories that we're hearing and memories through the elders group. So the idea to be quite generous in how we interpret some of these moves on site to make sure that they're linking to those external areas is really important. And as I said before, a lot of these ideas we're trying to share with all of the stakeholders in the surrounding areas. So if there is opportunity to genuinely connect them beyond the site, we explore how that can happen. So it definitely is about connecting not just to the Northern Lake system, but to Kings Park, to the coast, and along all those key green links.
Excellent, thanks Shay. Now the next question is, the major pedestrian link that links to Muir Park, will that be multi-use and allow for cyclists as well as pedestrians?
Okay. Yes, so cyclists through this site are obviously extremely important. We've got that PSP that runs along the rail line. That is one of the most popular paths in Perth metro area. And obviously with school and Bob Hawke College has been fantastic in encouraging their students to get to school via active measures such as walking and bike riding. So certainly bikes connections are a significant part of our movement networks that we're considering. And it's really important that we make sure, knowing that a lot of those are children, that we make those connections safe, shady, comfortable for all of the children moving through, but also for those pedestrians linking onto that PSP as well.
Great. Okay. Now, I am going to head over to Patrick to ask him a couple of questions. And then we still have a couple of more design questions for you, Shay and Shannon. And we do have a few minutes left, so hopefully we can get through a handful more questions before we wind up this evening. Okay, the question to Patrick is, the Kitchener Common Master Plan provided an additional 1.73 hectares of open space for Subiaco. Will the Subi East project deliver sufficient open space? I believe that Dean is going to answer that question. So I'll hand over to you, Dean.
Oh, thanks, Viv. I suppose one of the major benefits of the redevelopment of this precinct is that Subiaco Oval itself can for the first time be converted from a privately used football facility under the control of the West Australian Footy Commission into an asset that is going to be shared by a large proportion of the community. We've got the students at Bob Hawke College, the general community and local sporting groups will be able to use the Oval, as well as into the future football related uses from the Football Commission at a point in time when they do come back to Subiaco. It's a wonderful asset for the community. It's a significant win for the city. And in addition to the Oval itself, it'll be complemented by some high quality public spaces adjacent to the Oval itself. We've got the heritage gates that we've heard about, the green spine and some of the curtilage on the northern side of the Oval. So there's some significant green spaces to be used here. We certainly have heard and recognised the advocacy of the City of Subiaco in relation to open space requirements in the area, and that shared use is going to be governed by a shared user agreement between the school, the Football Commission and the City of Subiaco itself. That document's been a long way progressed now and should be in a position to be endorsed and executed over the course of the coming weeks. And I guess just to finish off, the issue surrounding regional open space is one that's pretty common to a lot of inner city areas nowadays, and we're continuing to encourage the local governments in the inner city suburbs to further collaborate with the Department of Sport and Cultural Industries to work through further opportunities for regional open space in the broader district.
Thank you, Dean. Now I do have a question for Patrick. So Patrick, why can't we go higher or have smaller sites and then have more open space?
Thanks, Viv. It's a bit of a tricky one. There's always a balance between the height and the cost of development. So principally, it's cheapest to develop on a single level on a broad flat space, but obviously that's not a very efficient use of space. So there's a little bit of a balance we have to do in terms of the height and size of buildings, and that's influenced by a number of factors, such as, for example, the market depth. In other words, how many people are there actually available to buy? So you would have heard that developers have to have pre-sales before they can actually start development. Now, people don't want to wait for 2, 3, 4, 5 years to get all the pre-sales. So there's a little bit of a balancing act there. There's also the other one about just the physical constraints on a site. So if you squish the site up into a little small space and you try and make it a really high tower, you actually have to go deeper into the ground to create all the parking, and that challenges the geology of the site and also the cost of basement parking. So all of those things need to be considered when you actually look at the height of a building and the size of its footprint. So what we're doing is we're trying to take all these factors into consideration to work out where the best place is on the site, where the best places are on the site to accommodate these heights. So it's a little bit of a balancing act between the physical constraints of the site, but also making sure that we consider adjacent uses, overlooking privacy, the size of the buildings next door and across the road, and ultimately to make sure we have a good quality outcome for the whole development.
Thanks, Patrick. And while I have you, there is one more question for you. So, Patrick, you mentioned the cost to cover the railway line was too expensive. Can you please advise the process and estimate a cost for the coverage on which the decision was based?
Look, I don't have those costs with me here tonight, unfortunately. What I can say is they were definitely included in the business case as a particular item. And when government approved the business case, that component was not approved. So we don't have funding to cap the railway at this point in time. But we do recognise that, and we still think that that might be an option in the future. So what we're doing is keeping that option open for us. And we certainly are designing the master plan around that future possibility and future expansion of future railway capping.
Excellent. Okay, I think we've got time for a couple more questions before we need to round out this evening's webinar. So a couple more questions to Shay and Shannon. So are there any areas that plan to incorporate some entertainment spaces to attract people to the area?
Yes. So as we mentioned when we were going through each of the spaces, they're really big and we're making them as flexible as possible. We acknowledge that there are existing entertainment spaces, next door in Market Square that already function for the city. But our approach is to ensure that it's as flexible as possible and to design to ensure that any spaces that are intended for being event spaces or gathering spaces designed in a way that they're not bothering the surrounding neighbours as much as possible as well. So again, about the balancing act, but yeah, the balance between providing amenity that's not doubling up on what's already existing is really easy and suitable for use by the city and is really functional for the community.
Great. And the next question to Shay and Shannon, are there any plans to create more underpasses or overpasses to cross the railway?
Look, we're really lucky to have two underpasses and a couple of overpasses on this site. Trying to put an underpass in is quite difficult, especially with the rail. It's already set at a height, so going under it is probably not possible in its current locations. Going over, look, it's not part of the business case, but as I said earlier, we are identifying where those key connections are likely to be and ensuring that if it is something that is identified for funding in the future, that the site is ready to accommodate that connection.
Great, thank you. Now, this question that's come through is for Dean. Dean, why does the presentation mention an option for the stack at the PMH site? I saw on Channel 7 that this is going to be retained. Can you please clarify?
Yeah, I guess we haven't finalised exactly which buildings were going to be demolished at the moment. There are options around the stack. I think we heard about that tonight, but the DA is lodged in the system so that we could start some of the important referrals, particularly to the Heritage Department and others, to get the process going and to understand the key issues that might be coming out from the regulatory authorities and some of the other people involved in approving this DA. Clearly, we've only just engaged the CRG on some of these issues as well. So there is opportunities to finalise what we're going to demolish over the course of the next 4 weeks or so, and then we'll make those decisions as part of firming up the master plan and lock that in to go forward from there.
Thank you so much, Dean. So we've only got time for one more question, and the question that's come through is from Ron, and the question is, what are the next steps for the master plan, which coincides very nicely with the end of the webinar session tonight. I just wanted to also say before we hand over to Patrick that we have received more questions than we have had time to answer. So just to reiterate what I've said before, we will actually be responding to any questions that have gone unanswered this evening and providing a response to you following this webinar, in fact, to everybody who's registered. So I'll hand over to Patrick now to talk about the next steps for the master plan.
Thanks, Viv. So the master plan is the tail end of about a 3-year, quite extensive consultation period with a number of stakeholders, local government, state government, and the community. And what this does, it brings all of the information we've gathered together. And I guess the next step in this is our 5th community reference group meeting, which is the middle of June. And at that meeting, we hope to show a consolidated plan with all this information that we've actually spoken about tonight. And once that plan's been presented and discussed with the community and we've had some feedback, that'll translate into what's called the draft master plan. And we're hoping to get that done by the end of June. That draft master plan will then be open to the public for comment. And then once we've received all those comments, it goes through a series of approvals, internal government approvals, and will ultimately be approved by the Minister for Planning towards the end of this year. That's in a nutshell the next steps from here. Thanks, Vivian.
Okay, I would like to take a moment to thank everybody for listening in this evening and sitting with us for an hour and 15 minutes while we've presented you with a whole bunch of information and hopefully gone some way towards answering some of the questions that you may have had. I just wanted to remind everyone that this session has been recorded and will be made available following the webinar. So just in case you want to listen to it again or know somebody that wasn't able to join us this evening, that will be made available. When you look at the recording, there'll also be an opportunity for you to submit any additional questions that may arise. So again, if you didn't get to ask your question, you will still have some opportunities following this session. Following the webinar, once everything is ready, the webinar recording, we will let you know, we'll send you an email and let you know where you can actually access that. And also we'll let you know where you can access some of the engagement outcomes that Andrew mentioned before, like the Subi stories, etc., that are available for you to have a look at. So I'd like to thank you one final time for joining us and sticking with us this whole time. Really appreciate you interested in this project and listening in. I hope you have a great evening. Thank you.